Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Sports Desk, coming up after a big win at Stanford. We are not going to be talking about that now. By now you've heard, I'm sure, more than you need about that game. So we're going to talk a little bit about the BCS implications of that game now. Obviously, the Ducks moved up to number 4 after that win, and now all of a sudden people are talking about them again in the national title race. So Andy, I guess this is a two-man show, by the way, this time. So we're going to go to Andy, our expert. What do you think this means for the Ducks in terms of BCS implications? And, I mean, how much of a chance now do you think they have legitimately to maybe get back to the national title game?
Right. Well, this is all moot if Oklahoma State wins out. They huge lead over Oregon and Alabama, who's ranked number 3. We're not having this discussion if Oklahoma State loses. If Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, all hell breaks loose because you have a one-loss Alabama team, you have a one-loss Oregon team, and you have a one-loss Oklahoma team. They're all kind of jumbled together. And 2 of those games would be rematches, but I think a lot of people feel that Oregon and Bama are better than Oklahoma, which lost at home to a Texas Tech team that's terrible. So, I mean, it's an intriguing situation because, I mean, LSU beat Oregon by 2 touchdowns, but the LSU-Bama game was a snoozer, and nobody wants to see that again. So which direction does it go? I don't know. On the last weekend of the year, pollers have a funny way of fudging teams to create matchups they want to see. It happened a few years ago when LSU jumped something like 6 spots on the last weekend of the year to avoid an Ohio State-Michigan rematch. So, frankly, I think it's if Oklahoma State loses, it's just who do the voters want to see.
So let's say Oklahoma State does lose, it basically becomes a question between Alabama and Oregon, most likely. Probably not Oklahoma, because of that Texas Tech loss. Who would you go? I mean, who would you go with, Alabama or Oregon? I mean, you personally, who do you think would would have a better case of going to the national title game if it was between those two?
Right. Well, before we discount Oklahoma, if they are very impressive in beating Okie State, I think that just the desire for a rematch might outweigh Oklahoma's, maybe weaknesses and their, the weakness on their resume. But just between Alabama and Oregon, that's tough. I mean, selfishly, I'd like to see Oregon and LSU so we don't have another, 7-4 with like half the points being scored on safeties, which is probably what would happen. And again, you look over that game, and statistically it's very evenly matched between Oregon and LSU, and I realize the Ducks did have some points in garbage time, but if they don't turn the ball over when they could have scored, it is a bit of a different ball game. So I do think Oregon LSU would be a better, more intriguing, more interesting matchup than Bama LSU.
Yeah, my personal viewpoint on this is just that it is probably all going to be moot because for some reason I just don't see Oklahoma State losing. They've been really impressive all year. You look at some of the statistics. I mean, the defense gives up a lot of points, a lot of yards, but they're first in turnover margin as a team, and just seems. I mean, a lot of people have said this, but they remind a lot of people of Oregon last year, just with that explosive offense and playmakers all over the field. So this could probably all be for nothing. And Oklahoma State LSU would be a pretty great matchup. You got to admit that. But regardless, I mean, Oregon's pretty much guaranteed at least the Rose Bowl if they win out. So
yeah, the only way they don't play in the Pac12 Championship game is if Oregon loses to SC and Oregon State, which isn't going to happen. And then, in the Pac12 Championship game, Oregon could rest all of their starters, and Chip Kelly could go on vacation to Peru, and they'd still, have a very good shot at beating like UCLA, Arizona State, or Utah, who are just.
It pretty much is going to be UCLA at this point. No.
Who's to say UCLA doesn't lose to USC and Arizona State doesn't beat Arizona? There's a lot of unknowns, and then Utah can still be in there with their quarterback who is playing at a junior college a year ago and has the arm strength of ant on steroids. It's mind blowing how bad that division is outside of USC.
Yeah, we should just get rid of that division altogether, I think. Aside from USC, who
let them secede.
Well, we can transition now into USC there because they're coming into Eugene this weekend, obviously, and they've been pretty impressive this year for the most part. I mean, played Stanford really close, could have won that game easily, and been impressive. They weren't super impressive against Washington, I wouldn't say, but pretty.
Be 40-17, and that was at home in LA, but Washington had beat them 2 years in a row, so it's something.
Yeah, that's true. So we'll talk about, I guess, the matchup between Oregon and SC. I was looking at some of the statistics, as I always do in the lead up to these games. USC, nothing jumps out at you too much from the statistical standpoint. I mean, they have the 3rd ranked rushing defense, and only give up just over 100 yards rushing per game, which is interesting. They've obviously never faced an attack like Oregon's so far this year, but
well, Stanford's rushing attack,
yeah, that's true.
They're different styles totally,
yeah.
But yeah.
And then they're 9th in pass defense, and they don't give up any sacks really. They're 1st in sacks, giving up only 6. So that'll be a challenge, another challenge for the Oregon defensive line, who has obviously been impressive of late. And then they're 9th in turnover margin, which also was interesting to me. So I mean, just breaking it down, I mean, how do you see what do you see in terms of the matchup between these two teams?
Yeah, it's tough. I think USC could present a few problems for Oregon. Unlike Stanford last week, or USC has weapons. Robert Woods. Nobody's going to guard Robert Woods. Same with Marquise Lee. I mean, these are bona fide NFL talents. So I do think that Oregon's defense will have to play a very solid game. And just all over the field, USC has more speed than Stanford did. And yeah, they both have pro-style offenses. Barkley and Luck are both good players, but just the SC has the athletes. And so I think that could be a bit concerning for Duck fans. I know some people were thinking that SC would be a worse matchup than Stanford because of the athletes. I do think Oregon takes it. I think that USC, while they do have a good pass rush, and the rush defense is highly ranked, Oregon can run on virtually anybody with the misdirection, with everything. You just don't want to get into a situation where Oregon falls behind and you have to have Darren Thomas, standing in the face of a pass rush, winning a game for you. But if that doesn't happen, I do think Oregon will win.
Yeah, and they also obviously have the home field advantage this time around, which has proven to be pretty substantial. I mean, I'm not usually one to believe in any of those outside things when you look at a game, but I mean, look at the Oregon's record at home, and it's pretty absurd. So yeah, I mean, I'm going with Oregon too, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I have heard. I mean, there have been tweets. I think Rob Mosley tweeted that he actually thought that that USC would be a worse matchup for Oregon than Stanford, and Stanford ended up being a fairly lopsided game. So maybe he's right about that, but I do think Oregon will probably come out on top. So I guess with that, we'll move on to some volleyball.
We gonna do picks?
Picks?
Football
yeah,
picks?
we probably should do picks. All right. Well, why don't you go first then?
Well, we'll stick to almost what we did last week. We'll go 42-34 Oregon.
All right. I'm gonna go with 49-28.
Okay.
Made that one up off the top of my head, as always. And now we'll go to volleyball. They had an interesting weekend. They beat the number 1 team in the country, UCLA, on Friday, then went on to lose 3-0 to USC, also a very good team. You've looked at those games now, the statistics. I mean, what jumped out at you, and what does that win over the number 1 team mean for their implications down the road?
Yeah. Well, first, they were down 0-2 to the number 1 team in the country, and then found a way to win 3 straight sets, which is just very impressive. And in all likelihood, barring a collapse here in the last few games, really does ice away a postseason berth, because they now have 3 wins over top 10 teams. This was their 2nd win over the then number 1 ranked team in the country. They beat Penn State in the season opener. So just really huge all the way around. It's kind of like it is in football, where matchups can really dictate the way a game transpires. And UCLA, very good passing team, very good serving team, good defensive team. They don't have necessarily a ton of explosive hitters that are just going to out-jump and out-athlete you, whereas USC does. And Oregon doesn't match up well with USC. They have Alex Jupiter, USC's outside hitter, can probably touch 10, 5, 11 feet, and just a bit too much talent. But going into that match, into the UCLA match, Jim Moore said they had to out UCLA USC UCLA. Jim Moore said they had to out UCLA essentially, serve better, pass better, and Oregon's strengths, line up very well with UCLA's, and they were able to do that. But USC just not a great matchup, and even if Oregon was, playing its best and didn't, wasn't riding off this top win and maybe a bit of a letdown, I'm not sure how well they would fare. But 4 games left in the year, basically assured them an NCAA tournament berth, not too much to complain about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it'll be an exciting end to the year for both volleyball and football, we can assume. And that'll about do it for us. So we'll see you next week after the USC game.